Good evening to everybody who's watching and just joined. This is the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Thames Valley branch event, and I'm the chairman of that branch, James Richardson, and I'm really pleased that we have this event today. We host a number of events as a branch, some of which are in person, and they are invariably all either directly available online at the same time or available as a recording. So really pleased to have you all with us, and would just ask and encourage people to keep reviewing our LinkedIn page, our website, and any emails you may get from us for upcoming events, because it's having people here, and especially when we can have people in the room as well, that is why we do this, and what it's all about for us. So thank you all for joining. In terms of tonight, just on the technology front, before we go, we've already seen the question and answer box be used. What the process is going to be is Colin's going to chair our event, and at the end of it, finishing at 7:30, we will review the question and answer box. So any questions you've got, please pop them in there, and we'll do our best to work through as many of those as we can after the main structure has finished. So today has been is a mediation based workshop, which has really generated an awful lot of interest. So something I would just like to again throw out is, if any of the participants have suggestions or topics which you'd be interested on hearing about in the mediation realm, or indeed any feedback on today's event, we'd be really pleased to hear it. So you've had communications from us. If you can just reply to those with any suggestions, it'd be much appreciated, and we'd really look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Um, I can see somebody's put their hand up, but I'm not sure what I can do about that. If you could just pop any questions you may have into the question and answer box, that's how we'll deal with it in today's session. And turning to today's session, it's mediation, and we were discussing before we started that being a mediator can be a lonely role, or you can often be on your own. And it's only by having a group of fellow mediators who understand what you're going through and the challenges you're faced with, that you can have somebody to bounce ideas off of, and a group to discuss and learn with. So I'm really pleased for that reason to have this group of very distinguished mediators with us today. It's a fantastic panel, and I'm going to let them get straight into today's event. So, Colin Robertson, I'm going to hand over to you as our chair for the event. Thank you all very much for today, and I really look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Okay, thank you very much, James. And to those of you who've pre-submitted your questions, if you have any follow-up questions during the workshop, then we'll try to answer as many as possible within our allotted time. As the title suggests, instead of the usual concentration on getting the practice and procedure in place, we are homing in on the difficult aspects of achieving the elusive settlement, i.e., the managing of the individual personalities of those taking part. It has to be remembered, depending on the type of mediation, the mediator may have had little or no contact with the parties prior to meeting them on the day. The mediator is not only to convince the parties in a very short timescale that they're competent, but to have the ability to think on their feet as the meeting progresses. They also have to learn to adapt to whatever emerges, plus keep the parties on course. Going by your questions, it's impossible to be 100% prepared. Thankfully, our panel members have seen most of it before. We have a lot to get through in our hour, so let me very briefly introduce the panel and remind you that their full details can be obtained from their respective LinkedIn and website pages. First is Rob Langley, ex-barrister, ex-solicitor, and now full-time mediator, adjudicator, and arbitrator, with over 30 years' experience in dispute resolution and ADR. Next, Neil Goodrum, ex-solicitor, and now full-time mediator, with over 30 years' experience in dispute resolution and ADR. And finally, Trish Groves, mediator and trainer, with over 25 years' experience in ADR. Could I just thank Trish for attending with the remnants of a very bad bout of COVID tonight and maybe a bit croakier than usual, but slowly on the mend, I hope, Trish.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um, as chairman this evening, my name is Colin Robertson, now a non-practicing chartered surveyor with over 40 years experience in dispute resolution and ADR. Okay, as I said, we have a lot to try and get through this evening, starting with the first of our questions, which, by the way, will all remain anonymous to maintain confidentiality. And the first one is as follows. Right, panel, many years ago, I observed a mediation which involved a major business against a middle-aged couple who had been in dispute for several years involving the loss of their home. There was an obvious imbalance and the mediator handled it well. Have the panel experienced such a situation? And if so, how did they handle it? Rob, would you like to start with that?
Yes, thank you. I can think of just such a mediation I did at the beginning of last year between quite a sophisticated and well-off couple and their landscape architectural contractors who had, they said, made a terrible, terrible mess of their beautiful and very extensive garden. And they felt very, very strongly, as people do when their homes are affected by a dispute. And there was an imbalance there. It was an imbalance, firstly, of contractual position because they'd signed up to the contractor's standard terms. There was an imbalance of expertise. The contractor was used to recovering contractual debts, and they'd never been involved in something of this nature before. I was very fortunate in that the parties agreed to go to mediation well before the date of the mediation. I had about 4 or 5 weeks. During that time, I was able to have, as I always do, a Zoom call with each side confidentially to explore their position and to introduce myself. I had enough time that I was able to have 2 Zoom calls in succession with each side. And during that process, I was able to suggest to the couple that they needed legal advice because, although I couldn't tell them this, their understanding of the law was wildly incorrect. They had confidence born from watching too many TV programs about amazing judges and crusading lawyers that all they had to do was tell the lovely old man in the fancy dress what their case was, and he would or she would just give them whatever they wanted. And of course, we all know the law doesn't work like that. But fortunately, they went off and got some very good legal advice. So I managed to address an imbalance, which also, I believe, did the claimants, the contractor, a favour, because the claimant's contractor was now dealing with somebody who had, through the advice they're receiving, a commercial awareness and a sophistication which, without their lawyers to help them, the parties would not have had. And that made negotiating a sensible and balanced outcome a lot easier.
Could I just ask, Rob, how did you personally intervene in that? You know, how do you think your style changed, or what you actually did?
I'm not sure actually, because I don't video myself. I know that my style changes. I know that the way I speak, the grammar that I use, the language that I use, even as a Northumbrian from the far north of the country, even my accent changes depending on whether I'm in a bus queue in Jarrow or whether I'm in the High Court on the Strand. It's going to vary, so I can't really answer that question, Colin. I do know that I think generally, first of all, you can't take sides. However sorry you feel for somebody, you cannot tip the scales. And for me, that's an absolute ethical no-no. And you've got to kind of rein yourself in. You know, you can't start talking about the Consumer Rights Act and giving top tips to consumer mediation parties. And secondly, I do think that it's very important to just listen, demonstrate that people are being heard, that their point of view is valid and it's understood as being valid and it's validated. And I don't want to sound like Meghan Markle here, but actually giving parties that recognition empowers them to take risks and to let go of their grievance. These people have enormous Reams, they could rant on about this for hours, but they kind of, I just let them talk themselves out. And when they'd done that, we got a deal done. So those are a few tips on how do you deal with imbalances.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, couple of things. I mean, I'm probably going to say a lot of what Rob said, perhaps just with different words. I mean, the little aid memoir that I have in terms of power imbalances is that I'm responsible as mediator for a fair process. I'm not responsible for a fair outcome. I'm not responsible for that. And so, what can I do to make sure that that process is fair and the power imbalance doesn't distort that process? And you know, we've done all sorts of things. I can think of one in particular. It was an employment case involving a large organization and a fairly junior employee, and the employee was suffering from depression and felt bullied and all those kinds of things. And we spent a lot of time setting up and indeed choreographing the joint meeting. And how that would work so that that employee was able to have a fair opportunity to participate.
Yes.
So you can do things, I think, with the process to make sure that you have got that fair process, and that is helping with the balance. The other thing, I mean, I totally endorse what Rob said about pre-mediation contact. I think we've probably mentioned that quite a bit this evening. And the other thing, probably just different words from what Rob was saying. You're building empathy. You're building a relationship of trust and confidence with the parties so that they feel, and of course, I always say to them, you know, I can only work with your consent. I'm not going to make you do anything. And hopefully that helps them to be able to participate. But very much endorse what Rob said there.
Actually,
Right.
coming on to that, what you said, Neil, sorry, jumping in across Trish.
Yeah.
When you're saying about the employee having space to speak and so on, would you do that in the context of an opening session? Because I find that sometimes the claimant is a big outfit, they've done loads of mediations, they think that the opening session is a waste of time. And I explain that I want the opening session not for them. I want them to be able to hear the claimant. I want the claimant to know that he's being heard. It's not just to kind of give an apology, but actually sometimes the claimant is going to be the primary witness. The aggrieved person, this kind of small man, as it were, is going to be the main witness. And if they come across as a powerful witness with a bit of an emotional punch, sometimes the defendant, with sophisticated solicitor sitting there, will think, "Wow, the judge is going to like this guy. We didn't realise the strength, the emotional strength of this case." So sometimes you're doing everybody a favour by making sure that the little guy gets heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I don't want to talk and not give Trish an opportunity. I mean, in that particular case I had in mind, we started at 10 o'clock in private meetings, and we didn't have an opening joint session until about 12:30, and we spent all that time negotiating how that opening meeting would operate so that the employer had the opportunity to do what they needed to do, but the employee had a way of dealing with that opening joint meeting that meant that they were able to express their views as best they could. And you know, sometimes it's about arranging who comes into the joint meeting. Anyway, I'll stop talking now and let Trish have her turn.
Just a quick thing. That's interesting what you said about having all those private meetings before the joint meetings. I'm very pleased to hear other people doing that. It is very beneficial. And often you can come up with a lot more the people that are ready to negotiate by the time they get to it. Trish, I'm aware that quite a few people watching this are workplace mediators, and I just wondered if you could just give us slants on that imbalance on that side of mediation.
I mean, certainly I've come across cases where there has been a big power imbalance, and it is about you standing firm in your process. So I would say strong ground rules, making sure that everyone's heard in the room, certainly, and drawing out responses from like the more introvert, I would say, and actually quelling down the other side As you've got your summarising, you've got your reflecting, you've got your asking people, what's your response? What do you feel about what that person's just said? And actually bringing humanity and, like you say, empathy into that room makes a massive difference. We're all
Yeah.
people. Everyone's hurt. No one's without hurt in this situation. And it's just showing that there has been a massive effect on both sides, I think is key. Absolutely key.
So
Okay.
do you ever find that the employer is just or the defendant, if you like, the corporate defendant is just excessively confident because they're big, they've got a big budget, they've got a fantastic law firm, an amazing KC. Do you ever find you have that problem to deal with?
I think that's a good thing about mediation because it brings humanity into the room.
Yes.
At the end of the day, you're two people sat talking about your differences. And I think bringing people down to that humanitarian level makes a massive difference. It doesn't matter what your role is out of this room. In this room, we're all equal. And it's you as a mediator maintaining that equality and giving everyone respect, the
Yes.
same time to speak. I
Yes.
think that's the massive thing in mediation. So in that one room, you've got the control of that, or certainly you can facilitate that. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So literally, you can open up the room, but if the person doesn't want to move forward, then you can't own that. You can just facilitate it.
I tend to say to
Okay.
both parties, you've hired me to find you a deal. I'm going to find you a deal. You may not want it. It's your privilege to turn it down, but I will do my very, very best to find a deal you can sign if you want to.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you
Because at
know,
the end of the day, they own it. I mean, we don't own it.
I could go off a massive tangent on this because there's all sorts of things you just said there, about. I'm looking at the time. We must try and keep to some sort of timetable to get through some of these others. So thank you for that. So I'd like to go on to question two. Um, over the 2 decades as I've practiced mediation, I've encountered two cases where one of the parties has pressured me to assist them in achieving their objective at the expense of other parties. Despite establishing pre-joint meeting that my role was to assist all parties equally, in both instances the parties became uncooperative with me and it became clear that they had no intention of fully engaging in the mediation process. These still annoy me after many years. I have the panel, have the panel members experienced such pressures and how did they resolve it, if at all? Neil.
I think every case you get a certain amount of that. So how would I deal with that? I mean, I think the first thing is one of your roles as mediator is coaching. And so I might be in those early stages saying, well, why do you want me to do that? What's your purpose? What are you seeking to achieve? What do you think the impact will be on the other team if I go and say these kinds of things? And putting it back to the party that's causing you difficulties. Trisha's already put a finger on it in some respects. Horses and water. You can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and you're not responsible for making that deal happen. You're there to give them the best opportunity. But if they don't choose to take it, that's entirely up to them. So I think it's in the initial stages, it's sort of just those coaching questions. What are you trying to achieve? Those kinds of things. Building a rapport and building a relationship with the party, even the difficult party, to the extent that you can, is going to help you to deal with that. And if you can build that kind of relationship, then you are going to be in a better position to be more challenging as the mediation goes on, so that you can probably deal with that kind of behavior. But if somebody wants to be disruptive, it's up to them at the end of the day.
Yes.
I do
Chris,
my best, but I can't make them drink.
yeah. You must have come across this quite a few times where, despite the fact you make it quite clear what the purpose of mediation is, people still seem to want to think that I've got to please you, I've got to get you on my side, and people seem to have great problem with this in all types of mediation. You must have come across this yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, I think sorry, if
Sorry,
you're
I was
coming.
I was just directing it to Trish.
Oh, right,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
No,
Sorry.
that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why you've got to stay impartial. You know, you can't be biased. You've got to watch what you say. You've got to be the person. You've got to be neutral. Because once you come into that joint session, whatever you've said in them side meetings will come out. If they feel that you've said anything biased, they will bring it up 100%. So you've got to remain professional. I think it's difficult. I think people do try and hijack the process, hijack mediation, make it put pressure on you to take it in a certain direction. I think that's really difficult. And I've had loads of cases where people have done that, you know, well, I'm not doing this unless they do that. And it's like, this is the process. And it's about you being confident in the process. So that is not my role. My role is not to do that, to take sides. I am completely impartial. Anything that comes out of that, you've just got to be strong, really strong as a mediator. You might feel sorry for someone, but you've just got to stay strong because it's the process that you're keeping strength in. Does that
Okay.
help? I mean, it's just hard. It's hard. I've struggled. I've struggled with cases, certainly. But at the end of the day, I've thought, right, this is about me. I'm in control of this process, and this is me moving forward. Don't let people manipulate you, because they will try and manipulate you as a mediator. 100%. I certainly have found that. I don't know about you guys.
Oh yeah, people. I wouldn't say people are liars, but people will bluff you, and they'll assert a position and they'll adopt a position. You know, I am an outraged businessman, and they'll inhabit the role. It's not them, but it's just what they're doing. They're just projecting that. And the number of times I've had somebody say something like, "When we're going to walk out of this mediation unless we get an offer within so many hours." Okay, I say, "Well, we'll see." Or they'll say, "There's no way we're going to do this mediation if it's just drop hands. Any mediation is going to have to involve us getting money." And people say that usually means that they're going to drop hands. So I take a lot of what people say with a pinch of salt. I used to be quite resistant to carrying messages to and fro, and I still largely am because I don't want to be a mouthpiece. And I don't want to be an instrument to allowing one side to bully or threaten the other. However, I've learned a few lessons where people have said, "Look, I know you don't want to say this to the other side, and it's, you know, maybe it's a threat like we're going to do X, Y, and Z unless so and so. We're going to get judgment, take your house off you, this sort of thing." But I really think the guy needs to hear that. And I'll think about it and I'll go over it with them. I'll say, "Well, what do you want to achieve by this? And is it appropriate?" And if I'm satisfied, if it ticks all my boxes, I'll take that message next door. And several times, really memorable times, to my amazement, instead of the other side flying off the handle and ending the mediation, they've gone, "Oh, well, in that case, I'll accept his last offer." So you never know what's going on in people's minds. And it would be, and I've learned, it's unwise to assume that you can guess what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think I would echo Trish, and my answer to nearly all these questions involves trusting and using the process, you know, the iterative process of mediation, which develops people's understanding and brings them together. And I think it's very, very powerful. So I trust it.
Could I just because this one we talked about this one before, question 3, which overlaps heavily with what we're just talking about and really reflects game playing, I think.
Yes.
And so party A tells me as mediator, despite what they say in the open position statement, that they have no intention of offering anything by way of settlement, that they are merely using the mediation to find out the lowest sum party B is willing to accept to settle the dispute. What should I tell party B about party A's intentions? Rob, perhaps if you just want.
Absolutely nothing. You've given a
Yes.
strict duty of confidentiality to both sides. And I think you're trying to work on the basis of trust, of good faith, and of an open relationship. So the mediator has an open relationship with the claimants and with the defendants, with A and with B. And I think you say to A confidently but respectfully, I can't pass that on. or rather, sorry, you know you shouldn't be saying that to me. I can't tell the other side. Will you let me tell the other side? What do you think will happen if the other side knew that? So right now, are you keeping them there under false pretenses? So, have a really hard, frank, polite conversation with the guy that wants you to do it, because he's probably only saying that because he thinks it sounds clever. It's probably, I wrote when I took notes about question 3, I wrote grandstanding in big letters next to it. People are a bit naive when they get into these things. But if that was really, really the case, you'd have to probably you'd have to probably eventually, after an hour or two, you'd have to end the mediation.
If they maintain that position.
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
certainly done a case where that's been the first thing, and it's just a tick box situation, and I'm not engaging, but I need to tick this box, go through mediation.
Yeah.
And actually, I've said, well, I'm not going ahead. I don't feel that I can. You disengage from the process, so you're not doing mediation because you've just told me that you're not going to do it. And at that point, I've explored what else are you going to do then. And they've actually come round and said, actually, I would like to do mediation now. And this has all been in the scope of a meeting, a separate meeting. And then we've gone forward and we have got a really good agreement. But certainly, I think somebody's come in saying, oh, well, it's like you say, grandstanding. It's saying, no, I'm not engaging, I'm just ticking a box. Well, I'm not here to be ticking a box. I'm here to go through a process, And I think it's about you being strong as a mediator again, saying, right, okay, you don't want to move forward. What are your alternatives? Not as in what are your alternative threat, but as in let's explore the situation for you then. If you feel that this isn't going to move forward, what else could you do? And it might be that they have some other alternative, and that's fine, and maybe that's more appropriate than mediation. So.
Okay, Neil.
Yeah, I think I mean both Rob and Tricia are clearly right so far as that's concerned. I mean, a lot of it depends on when this comes up in the course of the day. I mean, if this is right at the beginning, then I'd be sort of wanting to explore that a bit more. What are the alternatives? Why are you taking this point? How does this help you? And so on and so forth. I think one of the other guiding principles I have as a mediator, and it's something that it took me quite a long time to learn from moving from being a lawyer to be a mediator, which is to live with the uncertainty.
Yes.
They say, okay, well, this is our position right now. Okay, fine, that's where you are. Let's explore the implications of that. Right, I'm going to leave you there for a while. I'm going to go and talk to the other team. There may be something that comes from the other team that they permit me to say to this first team that might change the picture. Who knows? So it's just a case of not problem solving, living with the uncertainty and being prepared to sort of take a light touch and see what happens. Obviously, as the mediation progresses, it's not fair to the other team if what team A is saying is, well, we're not going to make any offers, we're not going to do anything. It starts to become unfair, and then you get into the situation of, well, is this mediation going to reach a resolution or not? In which case, is it something that I'm going to call as, well, do you really want to continue with this? But a lot depends on where you are in the mediation, I think.
I think what you're saying there about you leave party A in this kind of uncertain, not very well expressed point. It's not very well articulated. You go next door and something comes out that's back onto that. And you ask for permission, you take that back, and it moves the situation. And that really kind of, I think, just illustrates part of the joy of being a mediator, which is so many times you get given a set of papers and you read the claim and, wow, that's a good claim. Yeah, I'm convinced. And you read the defense and the counter and think, oh no, that's a really good claim. Then you go at the first one in consternation because both sides look like they've got really good, well articulated positions. How are you ever going to get these two cases together? And to which the answer is just start the process and see what happens.
Yes, I think the clues in the term, the position statement, isn't it? It is just a position to start
it's the
from.
maximal position. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. The next one on here is about confidentiality, and quite frankly, to me, this is the core of mediation. Someone's put here, panel, I consider confidentiality to be the backbone of good mediation practice and make my clients sign up to this requirement. However, increasingly, I find that the commitment to this essential element can be disregarded by parties as soon as the process is over. Whereas belief, is over. Whereas, I think it's a typing error, belief as the mediator that it is meaningless unless adhered to indefinitely. How do the panel members regard this element of the process? There's loads of issues in here about confidentiality. I mean, Neil's just alluded to the business about flitting from one place to the other, making sure that you've got permission to say what you're going to say. But this is more to do with, I think, the element of, say, someone actually saying something in confidence to you that you mustn't, under any circumstances, I don't want you to relate this. And then the next thing, they're blurting it out, and it's confusing, and possibly they've even said something outside the meeting. Rob, would you like to?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think there's two aspects to this. I think the first aspect is that confidentiality as a function of the mediation process is absolutely vital. And so much so that I now, for the benefit of the parties, I've now amended my agreement to mediate so that everybody who's going to be in the room signs up to confidentiality. And that even includes the solicitors and it includes the barristers. And now and again, I get a barrister who says, well, I'm not sure I should be signing this because as a barrister, you know, I'm above reproach and I don't need to be asked to give a confidentiality undertaking. And I say, well, we're all going to sign it. You know, I'm an ex-barrister, I'm an ex-solicitor. I'm happy to sign it, and I'd be very, very grateful, please, if you would sign it, because it's to give reassurance to the parties that everybody's signed up, because this is so important, and people will trust the process and they'll trust the mediator more. I think, certainly in some cases, if they're confident that what they're going to say is not going to be used against them, it's not going to come out, it's private to them and the mediator. So I actually really highlight confidentiality, and it's quite a big part of my opening introduction of myself to the parties. But that is very much when the mediation is going to happen, when it is happening, right up to the settlement agreement. Afterwards, I'm functus officio, I'm not involved anymore. If the parties want to run around saying, well, I told the mediator this and I told him that and I told him the other, it's no longer damaging, it's not damaging the mediation, it's not damaging me. So I'm not sure that I would actually want to somehow reach beyond the settlement and try and influence things. I think if the parties are unhappy that somebody's leaking confidential information, it's up to them to enforce it. I don't think it's my concern.
I wonder whether the questioner was thinking particularly if an agreement hadn't been achieved during the day. You know, that would perhaps be
yes, absolutely, and that's why the confidentiality agreement is there, so that the parties can then enforce it. Because I noticed the questioner says, I find that the commitment to this essential element can be disregarded by the parties as soon as the process is over. I think they mean it may be disregarded. And of course, that's the whole point of the confidentiality clauses, is that somebody breaks that agreement and the other side can punish them and restrain them by using the clauses against them.
Yeah. Trish, this is a massive thing in particularly in workplace, isn't it? From the point of view that it's amazing what you can get people to open up to, I think, in the initial interviews.
Absolutely. I think it's a key thing that people are scared. They're in the job, it might be a manager or whoever they're mediating with. They are scared that their position is going to be threatened by what they reveal. So I've certainly done cases like this. I've done cases where there wasn't an agreement and then somebody's gone on social media and yeah, and
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
not said explicitly, but certainly everybody knew on the social media what had happened in the employee in the workplace.
yeah.
And then well, as far as mediation goes, we can't do anything, but certainly their work code of conduct came in at that point, and they just fed back to us. The company fed back to us at that. Because social media, I mean, especially in community mediation, I mean, it's massive, and in workplace mediation, the effect of social media, people going on and bullying and etc. So confidentiality is key.
Yeah, yeah, and uh, basically the business really of when somebody has they're sitting there, particularly in workplace, they're sitting there. If it was HR they were talking to, they'd be very skeptical that this was all going to be kept under wraps, and that's one of the big things of the impartiality, isn't it, of the whole scheme.
Oh, massive, and that you've got no invested interest. I think that's a massive key. You're nothing to do with the company, certainly in the mediations that I do, and
Yeah. Okay,
that's
Neil.
massive. Mhm.
Yeah, do you know what? I think we could probably do at least an hour on confidentiality alone. And not even get into the mediator's obligations of confidentiality. I mean, when I saw this question, I read it very much on the basis of enforcement.
Yes.
How is that? And Rob made the point, once the mediation is over and people start breaching the confidentiality, it's the parties' agreement, and they are at liberty to enforce it in whichever way or whatever way is open to them to do so. And I'm totally on board with Trish's point about in workplace. If it's going out, oh well, what happened at the mediation? You go back to the office. Oh, what was said? Oh well, that so and so said so and so. And your enforcement is the internal processes of the employer, possibly. I don't know. Um, and obviously in other contexts is the confidentiality enforceable anyway? There's all sorts of debates I'm sure we can have around that. Frankly, I've never had this as a problem, but then again, would I know? And secondly, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody trying to enforce a confidentiality term in a mediation agreement. But that may just be my ignorance. But as I say, there are so many issues around confidentiality. We could do at least an hour on that alone, I think.
I was going to say, I think from my point of view, I'm more worried about, about making sure I don't make any gaff from that side, because that's the biggest problem really for a mediator. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one then, which is this one's. I understand the background to this is family mediation, and it starts with narcissism is a term now widely used, often inappropriately, that it is an important element in mediation when it is recognized. Can the panel share their experiences of dealing with this issue and advise on appropriate measures to ensure a level playing field is maintained during the conduct of a mediation when such relationships are so often deeply embedded in the parties' interactions? My immediate thoughts on this is basically controlling personalities. Call it what you like. It's not a term I would use, but certainly controlling difficult people to deal with. Neil, perhaps if you like to start on that one.
Yeah, as a little aside, many years ago when I was a new mediator, very, very experienced mediator came to do a talk to us. And so I rather naively said, how do you deal with difficult people? And their response was a little trite, but it stayed with me. There's no such thing as difficult people. There are just people you don't understand yet. And to a certain extent, it works. it works. Why are people behaving in the way that they are behaving? We're not psychiatrists. We can't diagnose narcissism or anything else for that matter. You can only work with what you've got and use the process. So, I mean, I've had cases where one party was actually afraid, had been assaulted by the other party, very seriously assaulted, actually life-changing injuries as a result of the assault. So they were very intimidated by the party who had perpetrated this assault on them. I mean, the guy had gone to prison and all sorts of things. And so it was a case of managing the process, and they never met. We were in a situation where they couldn't be controlling because they never actually met. They had separate entrances to the building. They had separate catering facilities. They had separate bathroom facilities, and so on and so forth. One of those exceptional cases where it was probably better not to have a joint meeting. And so it was within that management of the process. And again, as the day goes on, you can probably be more and more challenging about that kind of behavior. Certainly, directly abusive behavior, I would name and shame. I would challenge it. Probably in a private meeting first of all, but I mean, if it continued, then common human courtesy is something that I think we can, to a degree, police. One of the very few things in mediation that we can police, but we can use process steps in order to manage that.
And I suppose at the end of the day, if the two parties agree, it doesn't matter how difficult both of them may be. It's their day.
I mean, how many mediations have each of us done where we didn't meet somebody who was a little bit difficult? But they're always a little bit difficult for all sorts of reasons. So,
have you ever done a case where you've thought, you've started separately thinking, this is the way it's going to be, and then throughout the meeting, then brought the clients together, or even just together at the end to sort of shake hands and say, right, this is how we're moving forward, just so that you've broke that breaking the ice moment of, right, they are going to interact again in the future. They are going to see each other. So they're better doing it now in a positive state if you've got an agreement than leaving it up in the air with people not sure.
Which is a lot in favour of face-to-face, isn't it? Because, I think probably all of you might sort of say this, that it can be quite successful doing online stuff, and everybody goes along with it. It's fine, but I think in case of relationships, there's often people, particularly in something like workplace, where someone may have been off work for a long time. They've never actually met that person since they started the problems, and to see people walk out together and they have made up. It's a revelation. Yeah. Rob.
Yeah, I just want to sound a kind of a contra note to what you're saying, Colin, because I mean, I think, it is great when we bring people together. And I'm a huge fan of trying to get people to at least shake hands at the end of it, even if they haven't spoken all day. But I recall on one occasion, two law firms with substantial Talata practices who both instructed me before, appointed me to do a Talata dispute between a very autistic young man and his mother, his estranged mother, and he was trying to get his mother evicted from her house on the basis that it was really his. So everybody was very, very upset with everybody else. And they said, we want this to be online. And I said, oh, really? Because it's all in X part of the country. We could easily do it in person. Said, no, we've distorted by this. We both agree it would be disastrous for the emotional load for the young man and for his mum would be just so heavy. Whereas if we have it online, it's cool, it's calm, it's distant, it's a much colder medium. And sure enough, they were right, and we did get a mediated settlement. And I'm pretty confident that they were very wise. And if we'd done it face to face, there would have been one or more explosions of temperament, and which would have made a deal impossible. Just on dealing with these kind of a narcissistic person, I kind of interpret that as the sort of person who won't shut up. So every time you go back to the other room, there's this poor young solicitor. I think young for some reason. I don't know. I could be an old one. It's this poor old solicitor sitting there, man, woman, whatever, being lectured by this motor mouth. Frankly, just talking. And it's astonishing the rate of words people can get out sometimes. And I've discovered that all I can do with that is I can't sort of get into a row with them because I've just made myself an antagonist and I'm supposed to be a protagonist to both sides. So I'm patient. I keep persisting with the same points, paraphrasing them, raising them patiently over and over again in different ways and from different angles. I keep my cool, I stay friendly and respectful, and eventually reality just starts to close in on the guy by about 5 o'clock when he realizes he's not going to get £1 million, but he might get £30,000 if he just calms down a bit. So you can't change who people are. And I think it's right as Neil says. Sometimes people are in a predicament. You don't know what their predicament is. You're not in their shoes. You just have to kind of work with them, get to know them, and be consistent and patient.
Yeah. Can I just chip in there? Because Rob said two things there. There was a question somewhere else. I don't think we're going to get to it, but it's relevant to this. And he said two things there about what are the key skills of a mediator. And the two key words were patience and persistence. And those are, to me, are two key skills of a mediator. Whatever you're dealing with, whether it's a narcissistic character or a character who's being difficult in another way or whatever. Patience and persistence.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, you probably, they always talk about the after lunch sort of period when people start to get a bit desperate. It's getting to 3 o'clock and still having you to keep on going, and you go through that barrier. It's yeah, I know what you mean by the persistence.
I think in terms of mediation skills or characteristics, I wonder if another one is that you should, ideally a mediator likes people and finds people interesting, finds the human condition interesting. And being a mediator is like having the biggest, most complicated novel to read by a brilliant author, by a Shakespeare of prose. And you're just learning all the time about human nature. And I think if you have that, you can regard everybody with respect because you don't know where they came from and how they became the person that they are displaying to you. So, and I think that informs and enables you to be patient and persistent and just keep going.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that people have an opportunity to let the feelings out because just doing that can defuse a situation. Loads of times I've had side meetings or I've put, right, let's have a cup of tea. Let's have a cup of tea and take 5 minutes. And it's made a massive difference, in people's outlook, just having that breath, a bit of fresh air, coming back in. Okay, then I've got that off my chest. Now we can move forward. I mean, it can be a really positive thing in a somebody expressing crying or storming out, or I mean that can be because it shows the other person how much it's affecting them, and and being able to go past that, using your skills to bring that person past that point, often is really successful. I mean, really successful.
I had a gentleman he was living in a caravan in the middle of a ruined farmhouse on the top of a hill in Westmoreland, and I'd been out to see him as a pre-mediation meeting. He was suing his solicitors for negligence, which is why the farmhouse was a ruin, because he had been refused planning permission, and it was his lawyer's fault, and they were offering compensation, but he wanted £1 million, and his loss was about 60,000, and he had sacked several law firms for giving the wrong advice. And he at one point said he was walking out, the best offer was 45,000. He was walking out and I said, I'll help you with your boxes. I couldn't think of anything else to do. It's 5 o'clock on a December night in Carlisle and we're carrying these boxes down. And fortunately, it was snowing and it was very, very cold. And we're putting all these big boxes full of his papers into his little car to go back to his ruins in on the top of a hill, in the 4/6 scale sort of thing. And I said, I really admire you, Mr. So and so. He said, why? I said, well, you are so committed to justice. And you've got you told me you got rheumatism, you're living in an unheated caravan, you care so much about justice, you're going to turn your back on £45,000 because you want to prove that the British system will give you justice. And there was a long pause, and he said, you must think I'm an idiot. Come on. And he went back up the stairs. And I had to carry all the boxes back up. Well, you never know.
Right. I'm just looking at the time here. Oh,
Sorry.
it flies. I think if we go to I think if we go to question 7 on the day of a commercial case joint meeting, I was presented with a request to allow 3 further attendees who had a financial interest but were originally to be at the other end of a phone if necessary. I was not pleased at being presented with this situation on the day, but the other side agreed to them being there, so I felt pressured to agree. Paperwork sorted, the extra attendees soon became very vocal and frankly disruptive. Although we eventually got an agreement, they made the whole joint meeting day very difficult for me, and I occasionally had to request separate discussions with the other representatives. Should I have stood by the agreement to mediate and made them sit it out in another room? Neil.
Roll with the punches. Is my response to that, and go back to living with the uncertainty. I mean, it sounds as though that this person's actually done a very good job because they've managed to use the process. They've had separate meetings with people who were disruptive. They've gone with what the parties want. It's very difficult for a mediator to say, well, the parties have agreed that these people are coming, and the mediator says, well, no, that person isn't coming. I don't think you'd get away with that. So they have actually rolled with the punches, and in many respects, they've given a bit of an object lesson in how to deal with that scenario. They've agreed with what the parties have agreed with. They've used the process in order to have separate discussions to deal with people who are disruptive, and they've managed to communicate and maintain that dialogue and get it to a resolution. So that would be my approach. You've got to deal with what's in front of you.
Yeah, if the other side are okay with it, then.
Yeah.
Rob.
I think he did the right thing. They're obviously stakeholders in the deal. They need to be involved in the deal. And obviously they became very vocal. Well, he was letting them vent. And I would suggest that possibly by letting them be so vocal and be fully involved, they owned the settlement at the end of the day, and they made the settlement possible. So full marks, I think he did exactly the right thing.
Okay, Trish.
From a workplace perspective, I don't know, because I think anyone extra in that room changes the dynamics of that room and absolutely changes how people react. And certainly in my experience, the majority of extras that have turned up on community cases and workplace cases have proved very difficult and added even more stress into the situation. So it's difficult when the other party says, yeah, it's fine for them to come in, but I know from my experience that is going to change the dynamics in that room. It is.
Yeah.
It is. So
Yeah.
there have been times where I've said no. I've said, I'm
I think that
sorry,
is a big
this is what we've all agreed to, and this is how we're going to progress forward. And I do think it'll make a difference. So I haven't let them in.
Yeah, I think that's a big difference, isn't it, between things like workplace and commercial. That in the commercial one, it's a bit of rough and ready world to start off with, isn't it? And there's, I think Neil
Absolutely.
put
And
it
then,
very well about ride with the punches. Yeah,
yeah, and certainly I've let them in. And afterwards I thought, why did I do that?
yeah,
It's been
yeah,
an absolute nightmare. So
yeah.
certainly yeah, you've got to
Okay,
obviously read your clients, aren't you, and the circumstances, but
yeah. Right, looking at the time again. So we agreed we'd sort of finish on something a little bit lighter on the question 9. COVID lockdowns and the rise of online has encouraged a more casual dress code. However, particularly when attending as a face-to-face mediator, I believe that if they're paid for a professional service, then I will present accordingly, i.e. suit and tie. What is the view of the panel members? It's going to depend on the type, isn't it, that you're doing. Um, what do you think, Trish?
I like a suit and tie, I have to say. Depends. I dress towards my clients. It depends your setting, depends what your clients are wearing. But I certainly would always go professionally clean. And it does make a difference. You've got to groom yourself. You've got to show that you're a professional. So yeah, I'd never go too casual, ever.
Yeah. Neil?
I agree. If I'm doing face-to-face mediations, I always wear a suit and tie. I mean, they've chosen me. They know what my CV says. They're not expecting a solicitor to turn up, or an ex-solicitor, former solicitor, non-practicing solicitor. I'll get it right in a minute. In sort of dungarees and wellies. I mean, they're expecting a certain thing, so I would always wear a suit and tie to face-to-face, even if it was a workplace or whatever. Online, I tend to wear a jacket, but don't bother with a tie. Because you're quite often meeting people in their own homes or whatever, and they tend to be casually dressed, and it's fine. I have mediated online with a jacket and a proper shirt on, and my shorts on in the summer, because obviously online they can't see, so that works fine.
Don't stand up.
Don't stand up, yeah.
Yeah. Rob?
I agree with my learned friends. I've got two clients. They're both paying a fee. And they expect a professional service. So I think I wear a suit and a tie. I'm hopefully kind of giving a message of I respect you and I respect your process. I'm an authoritative person and I'm a trustworthy person. I may be a little bit stuffy, but that's part of your guarantee that you can trust me to do the best that I can on both sides' behalf.
Okay. Right. Well, I think we might just have time for a very quick sort of relaying of any odd events that may have happened within our careers. And I'll just quickly tell you one of mine was the first mediation I ever observed. It was years before I actually ended up becoming a mediator. I think it was 1999. I sat in on this mediation, and one of the representatives, and I'll just leave it at that, started creating, and it was unbelievable what was going on. Could not believe what this person was doing. And with the agreement of the party that this person was representing, he was removed. And I was asked to escort him to a room, sit down with a cup of coffee with him, and make sure he did not come back in the room until he was invited. Well, he promptly set about me, and to this day, I just do not know what was going on. So I came away thinking, God, it's pretty rough business, is this mediation? Yeah, Neil, got
Just quickly about the flexibility of the process. I did a mediation once in a major city in the UK. It was supposed to take place in a hotel, and the officers of this organisation, very senior, well, the chief executive was in issue with the chairman, effectively, and we went to the hotel. And I'm there ready to start the joint meeting, and there's no sign of the chief executive. And so we've finally tracked down his solicitor and said, "Well, where is he?" "Oh, he's in his office. He's not coming." "Oh, okay." So I finished up. You know, we do the shuttle diplomacy backwards and forwards up and down the corridor. My shuttle diplomacy was in a taxi back and forth across this city. And we must have done it. Well, I must have spent a fortune on taxis. We must have done that or 6 or 7 times before finally getting him to come to the hotel at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
extraordinary. Trish, have you had anything of any note?
I have to say, when I first started mediating, I started doing community mediation and I used public transport. So I'd gone to see a client, I came out, I got on the bus, and the guy was following me, chasing the bus, chasing the bus, trying to tell me more. Can I tell you this? Can I tell you that? Which was quite an eye opener. I mean, community mediation is fantastic and it is very eye opening. So yeah, that was one of my good memories.
Okay, James, I think we've just about hit it spot on there, 7:30. Have you been able to have a look at any questions come through that we could
Yeah,
be looking?
they certainly have, and that's been brilliant. So thank you all very much for what you've done today. I'm going to start with one from an anonymous attendee, but they've said that they've experienced and heard about mediations where clients regret reaching an agreement and they want to withdraw and can't do so. How do you deal with this? And they particularly highlight a case where parties are kept late into the night, and perhaps that causes the agreement or the settlement. So how would you deal with those situations or guard against them?
Rob.
Well, first of all, I've had this. I was representing a party. I wasn't mediator, and this old gentleman kept us going till 1 in the morning. And it was a three-way dispute about failing gates on a marina with yachts in, and we did an agreement, and the three solicitors signed it. And the next morning, and we staggered to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the next day, one of the other solicitors rang me and said, "I just read this that you and I signed. Do you understand paragraph so and so?" And I said, "Oh no, I don't actually." So we tried ringing the third one, and she didn't understand it either. And we spent 12 months at our own expense because none of our clients would pay us. Rewriting and renegotiating this deal before we finally finished. So my rule is, if I get to 9 o'clock and I haven't resolved the mediation, I stop. Just say, "Sorry, guys, it's not safe to continue."
Neil.
Interesting. I don't think I would put a timer on it. I think the question, and sometimes they stop a lot earlier because obviously everybody's got to be concerned. Is this going to be workable? And if you've got somebody who's distressed, who doesn't understand what's going on, who needs advice, who's tired, who's ill, or just they can't focus on it and it needs to take a step back, then I think you've got to make a judgment call and say, actually, no, I think we ought to call time. Let's do something tomorrow. And I always say in mediations, whether it settles or not, I'll keep in touch with you. I'll speak to you tomorrow. I'll speak to you in 2 days' time. I even sometimes say, well, I'll follow up in 3 months' time to see how you're getting on. So a slightly different approach to Rob's, but a similar. Another good idea is to feed people. If people get hypoglycemic, they get tetchy, so it's quite a good idea. And then you don't get an agreement, so it's quite a good idea to feed them.
Trish, I'm not sure this is something that would have happened in your circumstances.
I'm just thinking about one case that we stopped and we started again tomorrow and went from that point, sort of summarised how much, obviously, the positives and then moved forward because it was everyone's too tired. So
sometimes people are bothered about losing the momentum, aren't they? And that people might start changing their mind the following day.
that's the risk, isn't it? So you are better stopping, like, let's reconvene.
James, have we got another question we can have a
Absolutely, yeah. Hugh Elder suggests that in his experience, managing pre-mediation expectations is really important. So how do you manage those pre-mediation expectations and how important do you feel that is?
Neil.
Crucial. I think mediation practice is changing quite a lot, particularly as a result of our ability to use this facility, online conferencing. Like Rob, I would always try and have at least one video conference beforehand to get to know the people, and just find out, just find out what they think is going to happen, and then manage that and have that conversation around that. And just one little instance, you quite often get the situation, it was alluded to in another question. We're coming to the mediation, but we've got no intention of making any offers. Well, okay, that's fine. You've told me that now. Do the other side know that? And sometimes, I mean, particularly in clinical negligence cases, the defendant hospital or NHSR have said, we're coming to listen, but we're not going to make any offers. And it's far better that you've managed that both with them and with the other side, that's communicated a lot. So there's so much I think my big point is so much comes out of that extended preparation pre-mediation contact. It used to be a 10-minute phone call with the lawyers. It's not that now. It's very much part of the process.
Agreed.
Mm.
I think one
Trish,
thing.
sorry, I was just thinking of the time, Rob, and I'll just let you come back after. Trish, that's one of the benefits of the workplace mediation, the quite detailed initial meetings before the joint meeting. You can, I don't like to use the word condition, but you can manage people's expectations as to what they should be saying in particular
Oh,
when
yeah.
it comes to the joint meeting.
I'll certainly explore it. I mean, I've done workplace cases where they've both felt that they've both want to call each other a bully, which, you try and get onto specific behaviour, why do you think, and what's occurring. But they've both wanted that to say, you're a bully, you bully me. And it's been they're both clients to each other. So at the end of the day, if they need to say something, they've got to say it. And we can guide them and what do you think the response will be? But at the end of the day, they felt they had to say it, so they both went ahead and said it. And then at the end of it, I was like, so you both feel bullied, and had it all out in the open. This is how you're feeling it. This is how, and sometimes, yeah, you've got to go with it.
Rob, just quickly before we go on to another question.
I forgot where.
Oh, you forgot what you were going to say. Let's go.
No,
Let's go
I
on to the next.
remembered. It's a lot of people who haven't done mediation before think that you're an authoritative person that's going to tell everybody what the answer is.
Mm.
And I think you really have to spell out you're not a judge. You're not going to sit in judgment. You're not going to take sides. You'll never know whether the deal that they did is a fair one or an unfair one. Your job is just to make sure that it's sustainable and enforceable. And once they know that, their attitude changes.
Yeah. Okay, James, shall we try and get another one in?
Yeah, a couple more. Actually, just leading on from what Rob was saying there, I've got a question which says, how do you feel about mediators stepping over that boundary and becoming and determining a dispute or providing a solution? Has that occurred? Does that occur? And how do you feel about it?
Yeah, Rob, do you want to take this one up?
Okay, I just quickly, number one, sometimes people will say, well, the parties have got frozen and they're 100 grand apart and they won't split the difference. And now the side will go any further, they just can't. And you can say to them, would you like me to do a non-binding, 100% confidential recommendation for a settlement? And if they say yes and both sides are happy, then you might say, well, I recommend that the offer is accepted or the other offer is accepted, or you do this or you do that. So, and they can go, that's interesting. They don't have to follow that. You're not determining anything. I'm very, very wary of determinative mediation because you never know all the facts. You are not sitting in a judicial role. You're benefiting from people's private admissions and insights. You don't have a full analysis. You haven't read everything. You weren't there. And I think it's wrong to try and judge something on the snapshot that you get, the impressionistic snapshot. And I also feel that it goes contrary to the whole process of facilitating as a friendly, confidential, neutral. So I've twice had that done to me by a mediator when I've been acting for a party before I became a full-time mediator myself. And I hated it both times, and I resented it. And the one time we just fought back and rejected it. The other time we accepted the deal, but we felt we'd been ripped off. We felt we'd been badly done to. So I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, Neil.
Do you know, listening to Rob there, I was thinking that was a very succinct and masterful summary of how I would answer that question. So I don't think I want to add anything to it. He's hit all the points, and I would just be repeating what he'd said.
Excellent. Trish, is there anything relevant to your particular case, please? Or
Yeah, I think that was great what you said. I'm just thinking, like in the workplace setting, sometimes you can see that a solution that neither party may be bringing up, and it's about asking the relevant questions that might get them to think of the
Yeah,
solution. Certainly,
yeah,
that's occurred lots of times.
yeah. James, have we time for another one or?
I think we'll make this the last, if that's okay. We've had
Yep.
great questions and lots of questions. So I'll just reiterate first what I said at the beginning. If there's any questions that have been left unanswered and you think they might be something you'd like to see covered in a future seminar like this or something else, please do communicate that back to us through the channels, through our LinkedIn or through our email or whoever you've had correspondence with, because I think this has been fantastic and we would certainly look to do something like this again. But just on this last question, it's from Julia Burns, and she says that I often mediate multi-party cases in my area of contentious probate. I sometimes find working out the order of offers quite tricky, as it's not an obvious claimant slash defendant, and also ensuring that the parties are updated with offers quickly enough. Do the panelists have any tips for handling multi-party mediations, or particularly the relaying of offers?
Rob.
I'm going to kind of slightly back out of this one because although I've done a number of contentious probates, I haven't done a lot of multi-party things. So whatever I said would be based on theory, which would be try and make sure that all the parties give you everything and maybe work sequentially. Say you got 4 rooms or 5 rooms, work through all 4 rooms. I've also seen very able mediators like Mark Jackson Stocks create negotiating alliances where he'll get 2 or 3 interested parties to work together as one, which makes the mediator's job much simpler. But I couldn't speak with any expertise to answer Julia's question.
Okay, Neil.
Um, well, thanks for the question, Julia. Julia's a very experienced contentious probate mediator, so I'm sure she will have had a lot of experience of how to deal with this, probably more than me, to be honest. Um, I think it's just a question of trusting that process and keeping going and managing the expectations in terms of timing of offers. Well, in the early part of the day, you might be saying something like, well, if we're going to get to a resolution today, we probably need to be thinking in terms of what that might start to look like. And I emphasize the start by the time we get to the sandwiches coming at lunchtime and just managing that expectation. And then that's a check-in point to go back to when you get to lunchtime and say, well, we said, how do you want to deal with this? It's a case of coming up with a solution. How do you want to do it? The other thing about multi-party is crowd control. And sometimes it may be worth, depending on how many parties you've got, it may be worth thinking in terms of co-mediating and getting another mediator along so that you're working with the parties and you can get a momentum going in the negotiation better. I mean, I once did a mediation with 5 parties, and you can imagine on my own, and you can imagine you're doing 20 minutes with one party. I can never do the maths. And then you go to the next one and spend 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and 20. By the time you get back to number one, you've been away, what, an hour and 20 minutes? And it's very difficult to build momentum. So those would be my 2 observations on that.
Okay. Trish, do you want to add anything to this or?
Not really.
Okay. Fair point. Yes. Thank you, James.
Well, and it just falls then to me to thank all of our panelists here today. That's been a fantastic session. We're really delighted to have had you, giving that to us. And I, for one, have learned a great deal. I think there was something there for everybody, whether it's people like myself who are more new to mediation or for our experienced professionals. So thank you all. Thank you all for your time, and it's been a real pleasure today. So thank you.